Good morning, everyone. Winston Churchill had once said, sometime during World War II, that there are three things which are difficult, and I'm going to just paraphrase what he said. The first, it is difficult to climb up a ladder which is leaning towards you. So, how do you climb a ladder which is leaning towards you? The second thing which is difficult to do is try to kiss a girl who's leaning away from you. And the third thing which is difficult is to actually make a presentation on global retail trends after Govind's presentation today, right? I'm going to still try to attempt the third. When I was told to talk about global retail trends, I looked around, I talked to a set of my colleagues who work in this space across North America, Europe, Australia, and I was thinking that I will find some things which are different across different geographies. And the interesting thing was, at least amongst these three geographies, you find many more degrees of similarity. And even when you talk to colleagues from Japan and Korea and China, you actually find that there are many themes which are common. And one implication for us as we sit here is sooner than later, some of these will start happening in India if they have already not happened to the extent that we are talking about today. So let me start off with what are some of those trends. So the first, I would say, is the combination of human, mobile, social connect happening. So if you look at what happened early 90s or so, what was the beginning of e-commerce? Amazon is probably the true representative of that, which is still large and significant today. But that really was the first part. The second phase, in some sense, would be what I would say the multi-channel, where it was a set of existing brick and mortar players who started having presence online, but really the two were far apart. So it was truly multi-channel. To the extent that multiple times the left hand did not know what the right hand was doing, whether it was in terms of pricing, whether it was in terms of the policies, whether it was in terms of returns. So you actually had a situation where multi-channel 1.0 was there, but that probably ended up creating more confusion rather than actually helping the companies. With the advent of mobile, with the advent of really greater extent of mobility and connectedness, we had version 2.0, where I would say much of the world exists today, which is omni-channel, which also comes with its own set of challenges. But I think if you look at what players like, let's say, Sports Shack or John Lewis or Neiman Marcus have done, is to actually have an integrated play. And it's looking at not only the point of purchase, but actually looking at the entire purchase pathway from before, during, and after, and trying to offer a seamless comparison. The big question, really, to my mind, and that's the trend which is starting to happen, is around taking it to the next level, around predictive, where you have the version 3.0, which is actually the combination of human, machine, social contact. You see early signs of that, right? So when you start typing something on Google search and you have predictive based on what you have purchased earlier, what you have searched for earlier. When you place an order on Amazon and it starts telling you, would you also be interested in? The combination of all of these actually would lead to omni-channel version 3.0. So that's the first trend. I think the important thing to highlight here is it's going to play differently across different categories. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. Depending on the category that you're looking at, the consumer behavior is very different, and therefore the impact of this connectedness is very different. So I think that's the first trend that I'd like to talk about. My wife saw this presentation yesterday and she thought that this was the best slide, right? So you have George Clooney And really, I think the point here is around disintermediation or deconstruction. So life was actually simple earlier because you had consumer goods companies, whether they were FMCG, packaged goods or durables. They made something. They gave it to a retailer who then sold it to the customer. Life is now more complicated. So you actually have the disruption of the channel, the disintermediation. So yes, you have the e-retailers and the omni-retailers, but you actually also have brands having direct presence. And that's, I think, going to be an interesting trend. So you see three logos mentioned here. You see M&M, which is more of a single brand. You see Abbott, which is there in the middle, and you see P&G, which is there on the extreme left. And all three of them actually have a direct store. So far, and that's an important thing, so far they have been largely from a perspective of emphasis on learning. So for example, what P&G does through its store is actually collect a lot of information. So the primary thrust is not to sell, but to have a direct contact with the customer. M&M on the extreme right, on the online store, you can do customization. So if you want an M&M with your initials on it, you can actually do that. But if you want to buy a large pack of normal M&Ms, that's not possible. So far, the brands have limited their presence to learning and customization. But if we see how the trends are going, it's not unlikely that you will have an Nespresso equivalent model coming, and actually the challenge in some sense then for retailing would not be about e-retail, but actually about brands going direct. That's trend number 2. So you have different formats depending on who you talk to. Small means 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet. The fact remains that there are some structural changes, especially in the Western world, which are prompting this move towards smaller format. So you have greater urbanization, you have older people, and one of the BCG studies actually showed that older people buy more frequently and buy less per occasion. Like many of us in India, for the older or the retired generation in many of these countries like North America, Japan, etc., shopping, going out, is an occasion which is to be cherished, and therefore convenience starts playing an important role. Just to take one other example, new lifestyles. So close to 50% of the people living in New York are single. Imagine. So you have single member households, which in some cities in the US are upwards of 30–40%. What that means is, again, a change in the way people want to consume. Frequency of purchase is very different than what the shopping malls of the 60s and 70s promoted in the US. So that's some of those factors which are driving small formats. I'm not going to go through each example, but you see some fairly large names and brands and retailers who are going down that line. So that's the third piece to talk about. Small format across different categories, whether it is food and grocery, whether it is specialty, actually is starting to happen more and more. The definition of small for each of them is actually very different. So, for somebody, even a 65,000 square feet store is small, depending on their starting position. The one thing which I think there was near unanimity on was around the consumer being in greater control. So it's not one-way communication which changed to dialogue. It's actually now a network effect. And the challenge or the opportunity for the company is, how do you actually make sure that you are able to influence rather than just push a message? And in this context, advocacy in some sense becomes very important. in every category across every country in the world, the single biggest source of influence is what do my friends and family say. With the rise of this connectedness, it's no longer limited to a small group, but it's actually to a larger group with greater frequency. If you are deciding on what washing machine to buy, you'll probably SMS or WhatsApp or put something on Facebook. You are seeking information, and therefore, how do you use the network to your advantage? Here is something which actually Liverpool did. So this is, for football fans, this is an obvious one. This is the primitive version of Liverpool's Facebook page. So this is actually 2 years back. If you look at the page today, it's actually very different. But the fact remains that Facebook commerce, or F-commerce as some people have started talking about, could actually start becoming as important as some of the e-commerce parts that we are talking about. We talked about communication within consumers. It's about getting it out there. Close to 95% of the content which is there on the internet is actually individual generated. So it's not organization generated, it's actually individual generated. That's very different from the content in the past. There are some companies which have done interesting things. So if you look at the right-hand side bottom here, this is about Ben & Jerry creating new flavors in the US, getting ideas from the consumers about what flavors to have. In India, we actually see Pepsi doing the same for some of its snack business. You have Kraft on the bottom left, generating new ideas, and one of the ideas which came was, in the Indian context, it will seem so obvious, right? Which is the small pack or the diet pack, which resulted in $100 million plus in sales with the creation of the same. On the top, and that's my favorite, which is Lego. So you can actually go to the Lego website and ask for the set that you can create. And the brilliant thing for Lego is it reduces their inventory, it increases their profit, because the willingness for the consumer to pay more is actually more because you are customizing something which is bespoke to you. So user-generated content, how do you use it to your advantage? That's the one big thing. I'm actually not going to spend time on this since Govind talked about some of the elements of big data. I just want to share a story with you here. So one of the parables which always goes on about big data is the beer and diaper story. Anybody heard about it? Beer and diaper? Yeah. So the parable is the way the big data analytics used to work earlier was you start with the hypothesis and say, you know, gin and tonic should be kept close to each other. Sounds fairly obvious because you'll have a gin and a tonic, and you know, maybe you have a side counter of lemon as well. Big data comes into play, and there was this person called Daniel Pars who's credited with coming with this insight that they were going through a lot of data and they were doing data mining, and they found a high correlation between beer sales and diaper sales. Beer sales and diaper sales. And the insight was, in the US, what do fathers do, young fathers do on a Friday afternoon, Friday evening after coming back from work? Before they had the kids, they would go out with their friends. Maybe the spouse was a part of it, maybe she wasn't, and they would actually drink and have a good time. After the arrival of the baby, they actually have to stay at home. And so they can't go out with their friends, but the thing which they can still do is to actually grab a bottle of beer and drink it while watching whatever is on TV. Great story, except it's actually not true. It's actually a parable. So the fact is that there was a correlation. When they actually did the analytics, they found that between 5 and 7 p.m. on Fridays, it actually did happen. If you actually go down deeper, you actually find that beer purchase and diaper purchase independently also happens highest at that point of time. So it's a great story. Unfortunately, it's not true. However, the fact remains that beer and diaper has become as associated with each other as one of the examples of big data analytics. The last trend, and I'm going to use 3D printing as an example, I think the last trend to really be thoughtful about is around how technology is going to change. Yesterday I was having a conversation in a group, and there was a question about, why food grocery is not likely to go online. And we were almost having it as a scenario building exercise, and we realized that the reason why people think food grocery is not going, so we said, okay, what's the, no, to buy fresh food you need to touch and feel and smell it. Yes, okay, but what happens if there's a technology which actually allows you to give you a sense of what the smell, what the texture is? Would that start changing consumer behavior? Right now, it sounds outlandish. But 20 years back, 3D printing to any group outside a set of scientists would have also sounded outlandish. 30 years back, imagine you were talking to your parents and telling them about the fact that you have this device through which you can actually call up anyone, any time of the day. You can also listen to music on that. You can actually watch TV on that. You would have probably been looked upon as somebody who's slightly mad. 3D printing is one thing which can actually change the economics of many, many industries that we are talking about. One of the biggest barriers so far has been around the price and around the quality. So let's just take a step back. Let's look at the price of digital cameras at the time that it was early introduction. It was close to $1,000. 5 years after introduction, it became about 2/3 that price. 15 years back, it became close to 1/10 the price. It's not the only category in which this happened. Laser printer, you see the same phenomena. $4,000 to less than $250. Today, already, you have some 3D printers, average quality, available at $500 to $700. A decent one is available for $2,000. What happens if you have a great 3D printer at $500 or less? The way to think about it is 3D printers, when they started off, if you look at the written word, it was the equivalent of the original printing press. 3D printing today is what normal printing was equivalent to dot matrix printing. Just imagine what could happen if it goes down the way of the laser printer. It could be a whole new world, different economics, different set of challenges and opportunities. 3D printer is an example. I think whether it is in terms of motion sensing, whether it's in terms of physical recognition, whether it's in terms of sensory, there are a set of technologies which can actually change the way retailing, e-retailing, m-retailing, f-retailing, all of that happens. By no means are these 7 trends the only or the most exhaustive trends, but these are what I believe could actually change the face of retailing in India over the next few years. Thank you.